congratulations on the amazing growth. I seen the network grow to like 20,000 nodes, like almost on a weekly basis now for the last few weeks. And I have to say, I'm also running one of those nodes. So
Oh, cool.
even though I'm not active in the Discord, I'm like lurking in the background, and
Nice.
I think it's a fantastic project. And I think, I think also that's partly the reason why so many people are just kind of finding out about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Um,
mean, it's a big idea. Yeah. I'm glad you're running one. It would be my vision that everybody would run one or two, rather than some people running more. But you can't enforce
yeah,
that. So,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. What's like the biggest number of nodes that are owned by one operator, do you think?
I have no idea. No idea.
Fair enough.
Yeah. I wish I knew.
So
No.
you can't. I mean, is there no way to? I guess there's no way to check, right? Is
Well,
there?
there's no way because they can split up their amount of Satori they hold and stuff into different addresses. So there's just really
Right.
no way to tell.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's not like they sign up with their email address and go like, "Hey, this is this user owning those many nodes." Yeah, that's really cool. So the way that works is you have to have a certain amount of Satori in order to be a node operator, and that amount increases in increments of one for now every time you reach 20,000. Every time the network reaches 20,000 nodes. Um, do you want to explain a little bit about like the thinking behind that architecture and that limit?
That limit was not by design. It was by necessity because we started out without the, you could call it staking requirement, you know. And so anybody could run a node without any Satori whatsoever. And we wanted to keep it that way as long as we could, hopefully forever. But it turned out we couldn't. So we had to go to this hybrid model where we have to limit the network by size because we have a bottleneck. So that's the 20,000 node limit. And so we limit the network by size. And as soon as we can mature enough that we can get rid of that bottleneck, then we can, not really have that limitation. But until then,
Right.
and that will probably be a while because it's a hard problem. So
Right.
until
What is
then,
that bottleneck, if you don't mind going into that a bit?
it's actually a series of bottlenecks. And at the end, it's a very hard problem. We could increase the number by solving some of these other kind of scaling bottlenecks, infrastructure bottlenecks. We could solve those, and it could increase, incrementally. But at the end of the day, the big bottleneck is coming to consensus in a reliable way on what those future predictions are and how valuable. The most important thing is how valuable those future predictions are. So
Right.
that's the main bottleneck that we'll have to tackle eventually.
And that's to do with, I'm guessing, the core of Satori.
Yes. That's way down at the protocol level. So it's at the core. Yeah.
Right. That's interesting.
So we tackle it right now in kind of a delegated way. The network delegates that responsibility up to a central server, which which kind of manages it. But we want to distribute that ability to evaluate each other's predictions down to the entire network. That's where we have to go eventually. So,
right.
So that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool, man. And obviously, it's because it's an AI, I guess, would you call it proof of work, or would you call it something else like what the nodes actually do?
I would call it I would call it a hybrid approach. So we have a proof of stake model that allows you in the door, but it doesn't guarantee you anything. So once you're in the door, you can start making predictions and competing on what the future will be. You can start making predictions about the future. And then how well you predict gives you the amount of reward or whatever. So at that point, it's proof of work. But so it's a hybrid approach, really. It's both.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like the proof of work mechanism is one of those instances where it's actually needed. Like you don't have to create more and more increasingly difficult computations, to adjust difficulty artificially, because that's work that needs to be done. Like
Yeah.
the network
The future's
wouldn't
always going
survive
to be.
without that work.
Yes, exactly. The future's always going to be hard to predict. So
Yeah,
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 the difficulty is always going to be there. Yeah.
yeah. Have you seen like the latest news on within the AI industry, and are you up to date with like those the big players in the industry, and kind of like the regulations or the regulatory framework that they're looking
I try
to
to
create?
I try to keep up with as much as I can. I consider a lot of stuff kind of noise. And
Mm.
so, I got my head down. I'm kind of working on this all the time. And so I don't really, make it a full-time thing to keep up with everybody. But, I pay attention when I can.
Yeah,
I'm not
well,
sure
AI
what
is one
they're
of.
doing. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, it's all good. I feel like AI regulation is one of those things that's becoming like really well. It has potential to be really insidious going forward,
Yeah,
because obviously you have those big players, right? You have OpenAI, you have Claude, you have X to some extent as well. And most of them are lobbying the US government to create regulation to make AI, harder to create LLMs, harder to enter the market,
yeah,
to a point where, there's a big discussion between LLM being used, on people's intellectual property without people's consent. Which, fair enough, we should look into that. That should be addressed or regulated. But then you've got the flip side that all these companies already gotten away with it. So
yeah.
now any new player that wants to enter the market, that'll be such a huge like barrier to entry that if you regulate in the current state, you're going to have a monopoly, well, an oligopoly, but you're going to have like three big companies dominating the market. And it's
Excuse me.
wild because this market wasn't here like 6 years ago, and now all of a sudden it's this close to being monopolized by the biggest players.
Yeah, that's how it always goes. This is regulatory capture, and it's just natural. I mean, this is just what the big players always do. They get the power, and then immediately they turn around and use that power to block other people from taking their power away. And this is why you need a decentralized solution. I mean, in my opinion, you need decentralized AI from the jump, especially if it's, you need to find a domain that they haven't captured yet and say, okay, this is going to be decentralized AI. We're going to do it as best we can from the jump. And yeah, that's what Satori is for time series prediction. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I feel like that's one of the reasons why people are reacting this way to the project, because people are aware of how broken this industry is going to be, and how you need something to make it free and open and accessible to everyone. But you've made an interesting distinction in time series prediction. Is that always going to be the case, in your opinion, or are you planning to look at generalized AI or LLMs in the future?
Well, I think what people don't realize is that, well, let me put it this way. I think my premise is that time series predictions forms a very good base for generalized intelligence in the future. Forms a really good base. LLMs are language, so they form a good base too. And but time series prediction, it's an entity that has to exist in time, like we do. We are always existing, predicting the future. In every moment, our brain is always trying to anticipate the future of what it's going to see and experience, and how it's going to move its body and anticipate everything. And so, seeing that as the fundamental foundation of, a kind of a generalized intelligence, I think so. Yes, Satori has that goal in mind eventually.
That's interesting. Yeah, you do predict things all the time. It's how intelligence works in a way, doesn't it? You constantly predict,
Yeah,
even your immediate environment. You kind of constantly poll your immediate environment and have a prediction. You I guess you wouldn't be able to have consciousness without that expectations of continuity, of things being able to exist.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is what we owe our conscious experience to, if anything. Yeah.
Yeah. That's fascinating. That,
I
yeah.
think we kind of see the brain. We don't really realize. We think LLMs are like the be all, but really it's meant to be just the top layer. I mean, we have this huge brain in our heads and it's doing all kinds of things and whatever. And then we filter it through this area of the brain that really deals with language pretty well. It's like an LLM.
Mhm.
And then we speak. And it's because what we speak is what we experience and what we can talk about and all that. We think that that's everything, but it's not. There's this huge iceberg of information flow, and a lot of that information is coming to consensus on what the future will be on a global brain, inside your head scale. And then we translate that through the language mechanism, right? The language is trying to figure out what's going on underneath it. And so we have the same approach with Satori, where we build this network of decentralized computing nodes that are trying to discuss the future in terms of the future, not in terms of, language, like we're going to speak English to each other, but in terms of saying, no, the future of that data stream is in terms of that data stream, right? If it's a price, it's a number. If it's a tweet, it's text. In terms of that particular data stream, we try to predict the future, and then we're going to have an LLM layer, which we're building the very beginning prototype of right now, that can then translate all of that discussion, that consensus about the future into English, so we can interact with it and get a view into what the network thinks the future will be.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting when you consider that your thoughts are not they're not words, they're not in English. Your thoughts are not generated sentences like the generative, like the LLMs. There was this one guy that wrote a book about that. I think he may have been translated as like a Romanian author, but I think it's probably also translated in English. And he put it very nicely that thoughts are like a lightning strike on like the black canvas of the mind, and then it's that kind of lightning strike that then your brain decodes into words, which then your mouth voices, and I send it to you and you internalize it and you compute that. And just if you think about just the sheer number of touch points that we're making, like thought, speak, language, listen, there's like 4 or 5 different layers of interpreting a core message, whereby by the time my message reaches you, I'm like blown away that you can even understand the things I'm thinking about. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's wild. Yeah. And that's the way it is with all intelligence. I mean, intelligence happens in kind of a decentralized, distributed kind of network. And then it gets compressed down into a tiny little message that goes across the wire or whatever. And then it gets decompressed on the other side. And that's just how it always works. That's how it works between humans, like you just described. And that's how it works in our brain, because we have 2 hemispheres that are connected in the middle. So all this information has to get condensed down, and only the important stuff gets sent across, and vice versa. And it also happens in LLMs. LLMs, the most, they're built on like autoencoder technology.
Mm-hmm.
And the shape of an autoencoder. It condenses down in the middle and then it expands back out.
Right.
And so, anyway, I mean, that's the basic form, yeah, of intelligence.
So would you say that then LLMs can never really be a form of artificial intelligence? They're just predicting what the likelihood of the next word of or a cohesive sentence could be. But they I guess the LLM model could never have what we call intelligence unless there's another layer under the LLM layer, like kind of what you suggested with Satori, that creates that thinking, and then the LLM kind of just decodes the thinking, I guess.
Well, I don't know. The LLM, the point of it is to interact with us, with language, I mean, but then behind the LLM, you can put anything you want. And so I really see LLMs as just an interface. It's an interface for humans into the rest of the system. Maybe what's behind the LLM in a particular case is a database. And you just want to be able to query the database with natural language and instead of learning SQL, and it can just translate for you. It's no problem. So I think that's kind of the point of LLMs. And, I mean, in this last few years, that's been the craze. I mean, that's what every LLM company is. It's like, oh, we can put an LLM on top of this or on top of that or whatever. And, that's the basic model of, anyway.
Well, a lot of it, like so much of it, is also just marketing hype as well. I've seen so many products that have been like AI enhanced now in the last few months, well, year as well. Anywhere like between CRMs and databases and so many things. But the thing is, and this could just be my own experience, but if you go and actually try a lot of these products that promise you to be AI powered, in many ways, the AI side of that product is worse than the product itself. And it's obvious here that there's a lot of money, there's a lot of like thinking of getting ahead in this market at stake. Which is why you have companies creating incomplete products with sub-optimized models that then they ask like the lion's share to benefit from this like new AI enhanced product. It's happened with HubSpot recently. HubSpot is one of the most popular CRMs on the market. They compete with Salesforce. Salesforce has been doing AI for a while. HubSpot decided to kind of jump on the AI bandwagon as well, and they released their own model that's supposed to kind of, as you suggest, help you find information about a record by asking, hey, how many transactions has Jordan associated, on his record? What marketing emails has he opened and stuff? Not only does he not answer most of the questions that you ask of it, it can also just flat out give you wrong information, or like it detracts from the whole idea of of a database or a system, because it either hallucinates or it doesn't understand how to use its functions correctly.
Yes.
And I like AI. I think I love technology. I think it's definitely got a future, definitely got a point. But I feel like the hype blinds companies and stakeholders and users to a point where neither of these three get the best result out of it. Companies create a suboptimal product. Stakeholders are being led to believe, then shareholders are being led to believe that this is going to be the next disruptive thing, and users end up paying for a product that ultimately no one wants. Is just they've been told that it's exciting to use.
Yeah. You're so right. I mean, that's been the hype, and but it will mature, and people will figure out, okay, this is the limitations of what it can do, and here's how we can make it really do what we want it to. And so they'll add in the layers that you mentioned that we need in between, whatever it's translating. It's just meant to translate English or, human language into computer language, when that could be code, that could be, SQL, that could be whatever it is. So it's meant to just translate, and vice versa, right? If it's got some kind of network it's listening to or whatever. And right now, it's just not a very good translator, but it's going to get better and better. Mainly, I think, by creating more layers. We will learn how to use it better and better,
Yeah.
and then it will become more reliable.
I wonder if we will ever get away from needing an LLM, if we're thinking about neural interfaces and the ability to encode and decode thoughts directly through a machine that would in effect put an LLM out of business. Like, why would we go through these different layers of encoding, decoding, understanding, sending back a response, where you could literally go to the source and from the source and have like 100% understanding of that piece of information.
Yeah, because we wouldn't have to code it all the way down to language because we have a higher bandwidth in the middle, I
Yeah.
think that's what you're saying. If we can increase the bandwidth from brain to computer or brain to brain, we can start communicating with higher fidelity, with more guarantee, and without language as we know it. But more, you could communicate in feelings, you could communicate in thoughts, in intention. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. I feel also like in many ways an LLM kind of feels like the visual part of an operating system,
Yeah,
and the opposite being like just the Linux shell or the terminal. And you could make an argument, well, I'm pretty efficient at like clicking buttons and creating folders, in my Windows. But equally, you could do your job just as well by just using the terminal and using the terminal commands.
that's right. Yeah. Yeah, if you know
Um,
how to do that. But again, you have to know more. You have to know how to use the terminal, which is, I don't know if it gives you higher bandwidth in the moment, but it requires more knowledge. So yeah.
yeah. Well, I think you're right. Like more and more people, I expect them to get more and more disconnected from the inner workings of a mechanism, of a
Yeah.
technology, computer, whatever it is, right? And end up just working on this abstraction layer, which has also been a hype word in crypto and blockchain for a while. Everyone talks abstraction, and everyone, the leading idea is that eventually we're going to end up having this system where you just connect to Web3 and that's it. And then everything is there, and you don't care whether it's Ethereum, whether it's Bitcoin, Evermore, whatever. You just connect to Web3 and you do your Web3 stuff, and at least that's how it's being packaged. That would be a huge undertaking, but that's kind of the ideal case scenario.
Yeah, the abstraction. Everybody wants that because I mean that's all products are, is the abstraction of the complexity of the product. And the interface is meant to give you the best control while also abstracting all that complexity away. So, I mean, a friend of mine is really into cars. He's really into it. He knows how cars work. He knows all things about cars. It's great. I don't know anything about cars, and that's like a lot of people. We just get in the car. We know how to move the wheel. So we know how to interface with the technology.
Yeah.
But that's it. Right. And so we create these products where we abstract away all the complexity so that you can use the thing, you can get what you want out of it without having to understand how it works basically at all, And so, and that's just the way technology goes over time, and it's hard. I mean, it takes time to get there and everything. So, but I think it's interesting. We've entered a new world where we can now abstract, with AI, where we've just begun to enter this world, where we can abstract not only the complexity of a system, but learning the complexity of the system. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, but even with a car, you have to, you go to driver's ed, you learn how to use it, right? And you have to practice and let's not crash and everything. But now that we have machines that can learn, like we do, we learn things, then we can give them our intention. We can put them in a domain where they can interact with the system, and they can learn how to use it. and we
Mm-hmm.
just give them our intention. We abstract everything away except our intention, and then they carry out our intention. And so that's like another layer. We've never been there before.
It's very
Uh,
true.
so I think that's an interesting thing. When it comes to Satori, on that note, that's kind of how we designed it from the beginning. We want to give Satori our intention by saying, well, we care about this or that or whatever, and we do that through voting. The community decides what matters, and that's all we give it. We don't give it any other, like, here's how you should learn. We don't train it in any specific way. We just let it learn however it's going to learn. And then we give it our intention on what we want to know the future of. And I think that's really the way we should interact with technology moving forward, as much as we can.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's super interesting. I think it that applying that definitely works when you're aware, where you're at least aware of the process. I think there's always the risk of not really understanding what's going on under the hood, and then creating a command that might not have the expected result. Like, I'm thinking about coding when I think about that. Like, if I was to ask any LLM to build something quite specific, on the intention level, the execution would most likely be halfway there, maybe a bit of bloat, maybe like a weird solution from this like no upvote Stack Overflow obscure post that they happen to find, or old libraries, or but if the response were better, or a higher degree of accuracy, I can 100% see that happening.
Yeah,
Just drive me to the shop instead of me getting in the car and taking the steering wheel and pressing the accelerator and so on.
yeah, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And it'll evolve into that, but it'll take time. Yeah, just
It
takes
will,
time.
yeah, definitely take time. But it's good that people are testing it. It's good that people are like so open to kind of exploring the limits of this technology. It's got this kind of hype. I feel that hype is, when I say hype, I don't mean a good or a bad thing. It could be, it could lead to both. But one thing that it definitely tends to lead to is innovation, because when people are excited, where people are happy, when people feel like they're part of something that's interesting, emerging, or up and coming, they will um, naturally be more inquisitive. They'll poke holes, they'll find new solutions. I think it's generally a positive thing
Yeah,
in practice.
they put their attention onto it. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And I think that matters a lot in a space where there's so much noise, to be able to just capture people's attention on one thing.
That's right. Yeah.
So I think last time we spoke about Satori, and I think we touched a bit on the way the kind of like the long-term thinking about the predictions, and the way the predictions are going to feed into this one model that will then make connections about the various predictions, and come up with like a completely new prediction, like maybe like a meta prediction or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Do you have any kind of have you guys like further discussed that potential, taking all those streams and creating a more accurate picture, a wider, higher level picture of the future based on that?
Yes, yes. Um, it's built out in layers. So this is kind of what we were discussing. Like, we have this huge network that's communicating about the future, and each one of these nodes is saying, okay, I'm watching some specific things. Let's say it's 10 data streams in the world. And just maybe to start at the bottom, how do we define these data streams? A data stream is just a thing that we measure over time. And so it's a thing in the real world that changes over time. And I think sometimes in our abstraction, in our mind, we often kind of see things as static and
Mm-hmm.
like as one thing, but basically everything exists in time. The only thing that doesn't exist in time is like mathematical axioms. So those things don't change, but like anything else changes all the time. So, so if you can measure it, then it changes. Let's say it's the temperature of the oceans. You know, we have a measurement of some place in the Atlantic Ocean, and we're measuring the temperature. So that's changing over time, daily, yearly, minutely, hourly. It's always changing. And so that becomes a data stream on one particular data stream. We want to know the future of that data stream. And the measurement itself is probably not moving around. You know, it's probably not like on a boat and going places. It's probably stuck in one position. And so that makes a good data stream. And so there's all these kind of data streams flowing, all this data flowing throughout the internet everywhere. And so we want to capture those. And a neuron, a Satori neuron that's running on a computer, an instance of the program, says, I'm going to subscribe to these data streams. Maybe they're interrelated in some ways. Maybe they're not really. But I'm going to listen for them, and I'm going to try to understand them in relation to each other, see if they have any predictive power on each other. Do they share any patterns that I can correlate with the real world, with outside data? So they start doing that, and they start generating predictions on that. You know, it's trying to see the future of those particular data streams. Given whatever, you know, it's going to try to correlate those data streams with anything it can find that's useful. So it starts doing that and predicting them. As soon as it starts making those predictions, though, those predictions might hold a lot of information that would be valuable to other predictors. So those other predictors start subscribing to their predictions and saying, I'm going to leverage all the work you did relative to whatever you were listening to. And I'm going to use your knowledge to try to predict what I'm predicting better. And so then they start, that's like another layer. And then we have that mechanism. We're going to be building it for the world model, is what we're calling it. We're trying to build a world model predicting the data streams that kind of affect each other and the rest of the world the most. So this is things like high-level economic indicators or government statistics, demographic changes, anything that kind of affects everybody and everything. We want to know the future of that. And so we're going to be building this network which exemplifies or embodies this world model. And it has to be a network because, you know, the world is evolving. And so we need to be able to evolve as fast as it evolves. We need to be able to model it as fast as it does. So we can't do this thing where we're curating all this data and then building a huge data set that we curated and, you know, maybe we threw some stuff out. We don't have time for that. And then we build this big, massive, you know, centralized neural net. That's not going to work, right? That takes a lot of time. So we have to do it in kind of a decentralized, quickly updating, distributed manner, where these nodes start figuring out who they should listen to as far as predictions goes, and how those predictions are affecting their prediction of the future on their data. And as soon as things change, they got to keep looking for other prediction streams that would help them. So they have to be, it has to be a network so it can be as quickly updating as possible. So anyway, once we have that whole system that can predict the world model very well, we'll start doing this now, but then we can build language models on top of that to translate that system into English to help us make sense of what that network is talking about. And we can query the network directly, like you were saying, maybe the analogy would be using the terminal. We can go in and say, what did this neuron predict about this thing?
Right.
But it would be probably pretty useful to aggregate that all up in some kind of larger model that is trying to make sense of it and can speak about it. And then it can translate it to us and get better and better over time. So that's kind of the vision. Yeah. Did that kind of answer the
Right.
question?
Yeah. No, that's super fascinating. So when you say the world model, it's basically an aggregate of all of the predictions that the neurons are making. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
So every single data stream just gets clumped up into this model that's supposedly holding any kind of data that Satori is observing.
Yeah. I would model it as, I would think of it as a layer. Like
Mm-hmm.
we could think of it as the network is talking about the future, and all they do is, share predictions of the future. The real world data. We're sharing that data, and on top of that is a layer of LLMs type structures. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's like a pyramid. Like underneath the pyramid, it's this huge world of predictions and predictions about predictions and all that kind of stuff, right? This is huge network of the Satori network. And then the base of the pyramid, you start this LLM kind of, I want to try to understand this. And so it's sampling, it's trying to figure out what the network is talking about and why and how it interrelates and how it's been evolving over time. So it's kind of watching that. And it goes all the way up, probably several layers eventually, to the very top of the pyramid where you just have an interface that you can talk to. And I would think of it like that, more like that, not as like
Right.
one big structure that listens to everything, all the details, right? I mean, and that's how our corporations are built. That's how intelligence is. It's always like you have a lot of low level um, layer that know
Mm-hmm.
all the details. And then as it goes up, the very top layer, the executives or whatever, they don't know what's, the details, but they kind of get a vision for what's going on in the organization at a high level, right? And they can talk about it and whatever else. So
Right.
um, that's kind of the pattern.
Yeah, that's a good analogy for it, for sure. So with these LLM, I want to get a little bit into your plans to add LLMs to Satori, because right now, like you said, you can observe the streams and you can observe the predictions if you run a node, and if you go into your node, then you can just see the predictions being made, or you can go to the website, and I think you've got to type in like the exact name of the data
Yeah.
stream,
Yeah.
and you're going to click on that stream, and then you're going to get some numbers, which I'm guessing like people that are unaware of this are probably not going to know what to do with that piece of data.
Exactly.
So your plans to add the LLM, how is that going, and where are you with it currently? And then I also want to get a little bit into like the technical side of it, because I think it's really interesting to see whether the approach is to roll up the data, feed it to the model to produce the LLM, or to use more of a mixed kind of use a pre-trained syntactic LLM with the ability to query your streams, which would then spit out the data that the stream, already generated.
That's where we're starting. That's
Uh
exactly where
huh.
we're starting because we're at the very earliest stages of the prototypical, building that out as a prototypical layer. So we're starting with that, saying, okay, we have an LLM that can basically query the data for you. And so you can ask it. But as it evolves, we have to get it into this thing where it's been watching, it pre-trains it so that it kind of understands things before you ask. It's not just querying in real time and getting you some information that might be relevant. Instead, it actually has an understanding of what the network is saying and can answer your questions in English. So, but all these systems, they have to evolve over time. So you start with the very simplest implementation, and then you replace it or build underneath it or whatever you have to do over time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And have you settled on a model that you're going to be using it as your foundation?
I don't think we have. We're in the early development stages where we're kind of
Hmm.
researching, and we have some prototypical stuff. We're going to be putting it out as soon as we have something, though. So, and that way the community can play with it, the community can experience it and give feedback on how it should improve. And getting into that feedback loop is very important.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I feel like the more feedback you get, then the better your product, the better the vision as well.
Yeah.
How many active developers are there currently working on Satori?
Let me think. There's about 7, I think. Um, I mean, maybe if you count part time, there's like 9 or 10. But
Hmm.
so it's a small team, but we're growing.
Yeah, it's a good number. I think 7 or 9 developers, dedicating their time to building this thing out. It's definitely a good number, um, especially since I feel the amount of ground you cover today with 9 developers versus the amount of ground you used to cover 10, 15 years ago when you had none of the frameworks, everything you need, you build from scratch yourself. It is just, you can't compare it. You can roll a website out in like an afternoon if you get a right framework.
Yeah, that's true.
And are you guys still using Python?
We are for most of our stuff. We're using Python.
Nice, nice.
Especially with the neuron, because the neuron is doing all the prediction and all the AI engine stuff, and that's all in Python. So we just kept it the same. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Any plans to move away from Python at all, or do you foresee any technical or computational bottlenecks with using Python in the future?
As far as the neuron goes, which is most of the code, uh, probably not.
Hmm.
Um, we had to make it very versatile, right? I mean, this is running on all
Mm.
kinds of computers. We don't really know if it's going to be running on, a little laptop or a big GPU farm, or if it's running on a small miner's thing in his garage or whatever, right? So we have to make it as versatile as we possibly can, and
Yeah.
we can't really leverage other things. I mean, people have come and said, "Hey, you should just rewrite everything in C." That would take like 10 years, dude.
There's
So
usually that's like growing pains every time. It's a good sign though. Every time, your Discord, you got people going like, you should rewrite that in C or Rust. You know that you're growing, which is great. But also, there's got
yeah,
to be that one guy wanting to rewrite it in Rust.
yeah, and there are pieces though. I mean, that we could um, whatever, if it's better written in a different language, if there's a piece that you can break out and it really works really well. In fact, we did. We rewrote the installer
Hmm.
in C++ or something, I think, and it works great. It's much more lean. So that, but it's not really connected to the rest of the system, right? I mean, it doesn't have to
Right.
interface. It's just the installer. And so that was a great use case for that suggestion. Um, but yeah, we just do whatever makes sense.
Yeah. No. Completely. Completely. And that's also, you're using Docker, and that will basically ensures that you can run on any machine,
That's
pretty
right.
much.
Yeah.
You said GPU. You mentioned GPU farm. Does that mean do you support GPUs at the moment? Because I thought all the computation is CPU bound for now.
It's CPU. Technically, we do have some GPU algorithms in there that we put
Uh huh.
in, but we don't use them yet. They're kind of
Right.
in a research and development phase, and people can use them. There's just a flag. You can just turn it on if you want. But But you also have to make sure Docker is running to use your GPUs, and so there's a little bit of complexity, which is I think why we didn't turn it on right away, and because they haven't been matured, so it wasn't worth
Right.
the effort. But we are adding in more GPU algorithms, and so as soon as those are ready, it'll kind of be the default if you have them available and everything's set up. So it won't be too long. Yeah.
That's very cool, man. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
And how have you? Because obviously you've seen like really good growth from the community in the past, I'd say 1 year or so. Um, have you like gotten any like valuable or applicable feedback through the community growth and through like plans on like do you reckon that the community aspect of it has kind of changed your perspective or added to your existing perspective of Satori, um, like having it change
Oh,
more than like from being like your idea to kind of now being this hive mind that people think in unison about the development of this thing.
yes. Yeah, I haven't given that a lot of thought. That's true. That's true, though. I have noticed some changes. Mostly they've been economic things. It's
Mm-hmm.
been miners came on board and understanding, their incentives and all that kind of stuff. Mostly that has been what has modified the vision, I suppose, but not very much because I've been in crypto for a long time. And so I understand it. I had a pretty good model to begin with. Um, but yeah, I've learned a lot of details that I didn't really comprehend or anticipate before.
Yeah, yeah. So the biggest change you say is just people actually getting to mine with it and figuring out, oh, it needs, to be optimized in this respect or that respect, or
Yeah, learning what they care about, and um, that's been kind of eye opening. I don't think
yeah.
it really has changed very much, but it's changed how I approach
Mm,
things. I think a little
okay.
bit more. Yeah.
What do they care about?
Um, they care about it. They care. Well, miners are in the game to earn the token and make money on the token, right? I mean, that's what they're doing, which is totally good, totally fine, no problem. Um, so that's what they care about, number one. But they do have the second. They do care about something else as well. They want it to be a pure solution as much as possible. So they want it to
Mm-hmm.
be open and decentralized and distributed as much as possible. And that's good because that aligns with the incentive structure or the mandate of the Satori Association. The mandate of the association says you only exist to make Satori as decentralized as it can be in perpetuity. Like that's the whole reason it's here. So, um, so that's good that it aligns with that incentive structure. Um, yeah, I don't know. I haven't given that a lot of thought. I just kind of managed it as it came and handled situations as they came. Yeah.
Yeah. I always thought it's fascinating when you see a group of people that seem to kind of, come together and then share ideas about something, which either there's things you've thought about in the past and you've seen coming, or just like completely new things that kind of take you aback a bit and you go, oh, wow, like I haven't considered that perspective on things.
Yes, the including a staking requirement was probably the biggest thing that I didn't really anticipate. I thought maybe we'd have to do something like that, but I didn't really anticipate it from the jump.
Right. And
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 go ahead.
sorry, go on.
Well, I was just going to say we needed to include that because at very early, like during beta, it was great. Everything was fantastic. But as soon as it became the real network where um, we launched, then all these miners came in that were trying to Sybil attack and trying to, and so
Right.
as soon as that happened, we had to figure out, okay, we need a gate, and unfortunately, it has to be this solution. Um, we'd rather it just be open from the beginning, but it wasn't possible. And that's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, we found a solution that works, um, and it's a solution that we can take away later. We won't need it at some point, but that'll probably be far in the future. So that's the biggest probably change that was
Hmm.
unanticipated. Um, but that's okay. That's a good one.
Yeah, that was my follow up question. What made you implement the staking requirement? And I was going through my head, always had to be something to do with security, something to do with potential attacks, because I guess there would just be very little overhead to people just creating thousands of potential nodes and then attack the network in that way, wouldn't there?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Very interesting development of things. It's fascinating how it kind of in a sense speaks to human nature, and also how all things flow towards vulnerability. Like everything on the internet flows towards vulnerability. If there's a vulnerability, you can be sure that someone with enough time on their hands or a group of people will eventually find that.
Yes,
um,
if there's an economic incentive to do so. And like I
exactly.
said, in beta, there was no economic incentive. So we were just running, everything was good. And then as soon as there was an economic incentive, um, didn't take long.
How long did it take? I'm curious.
I think we had to implement staking within a month or close to that.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
guessing it was voted on by the previous, like, by beta users to implement that.
Yeah. Gosh, everything moved so quickly. At first, we thought the issue was just scaling issues, and so we were focused on, okay, when we were in beta, we had less than 1,000 neurons running, everything was fine, and really we're just running into normal scaling issues, and that was definitely part of it. But then it just kept scaling and kept scaling, and we're like, oh, okay, now it's going too far. Uh, this means it's people trying to take advantage. Anyway, so we had to implement it, and there was really no other way to save the network. We just had to do it.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think it makes sense. I think a lot of chains have seen this kind of growing pains, if you like,
Yeah,
where they've just had to do towards the beginning of their journey, they had to do something drastic to save the network and keep the integrity of the network intact. Like the rollback that the Ethereum Foundation decided to do back in 2016, when they had like the attack through the DAO, where people like broke into the DAO and like exploited his contract for, I don't remember the amount, but it was a significant amount of money. Um, and then the network decided, well, it might not be the purest, most ethical way to roll back on a transaction, but it's either that or we implode and we say goodbye to the network and we let the attacker take all these millions, and then leave everyone else in the community pissed off at large. So I think there's really that's a no-brainer. Like that's the only choice is roll back the exploit, patch it, and then you know
yeah,
hopefully some people don't.
that,
So hopefully not everybody forks out and comes up with etc.
yeah. The sentiment was pretty unanimous.
Yeah.
This is what
Yeah.
we got to do. So
I mean, it tends to be because, like, what's the alternative? We just let these folks like destroy our network. Like,
right,
were you able at all to figure out, or I'm not sure if you guys have if looked into it or if it was of any importance, but to figure out where the source of the attacks might be coming from, or any specific parties or locations that would want to do this, or was it all just random? Like, because I wonder, like, an attack like that,
no,
it means that some people must have been aware of the pending launch and kind of waited for that in the bushes, so to speak.
yeah, yes, and I don't really want to get into it, but I will say those first few months really reminded me of the show. Silicon Valley. Did you ever watch it?
No, actually.
So I remember I watched this years ago. I didn't watch it right when it was coming out, but I watched it a little ways after that. And I remember thinking, people had talked about it, and I was like, okay, I guess I'll watch it. And I remember thinking, this is going to be so boring, you know, tech. It's going to be a show. This guy's just coding all day, boring, right? And so, uh, but you start watching it, and there's all this kind of drama. There's all kinds of drama, and there's all kinds of things that are happening, and just to get his product out or whatever he's trying to do, he runs into all kinds of characters, many of them nefarious, and anyway,
Right.
and so it just wild. It's a fun show, right? And, but
I made a note of that. I've just looked it up. I remember that it's been on my list for a long time. I never got into it, but it's one of these shows that I have to watch.
yeah. Anyway, so I remember feeling like, oh my god, my life feels like that kind of craziness right now. So that was the first couple months. It's died down. Things are steady, but you have to go through those growing pains, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. Well, it's great that, the right decision was made and the community, prevailed, and now you have a healthy growing network,
Yeah.
all kind of sharing in your idea, which I think that is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, it is fantastic.
Yeah. So for, I guess, the remainder of the year, are you guys focusing on anything else apart from the LLM work?
We are. So we have a couple guys working on the LLM, and we have a couple guys, all these guys that are working are kind of isolated. They're kind of working on a particular domain. And we've kind of paired off. So we have a couple guys on the peer-to-peer, a couple on the on making multi-sig transactions, and that kind of goes along with the making it as decentralized as we can over time, and and a couple guys on the engine, and then the website, and so we have several initiatives that we're working on, and we're all kind of working in parallel, and we still have this hub and spoke model right now, where I'm kind of talking to each, group, or mostly each pair of people working on a particular vertical or whatever. And so that's kind of how we've organized it so far. And, later, if the team grows bigger, we can kind of make those their own teams. But right now, it's mostly individuals or pairs of people working on a particular domain.
Right. And would you say that then your role has shifted a bit? Do you find yourself being more like doing more like the high level planning and strategizing rather than the coding, or do you still code yourself?
I still code too. Yeah.
Nice.
Well, you got to, because I was the one that started the thing. And so I coded during the beta alone and before the beta. So I have all the knowledge of the code base. And so I'm trying to get that out into the minds of other developers, at least in particular domains. But that takes time. And so I have to code. I have to talk to them about how they're doing on their particular domain. So I have to be pretty involved with the coding still. Yeah.
Fair enough. Understandable. The people that you've got working, are they working full time? You mentioned you got like 7 full time
Most are full time
members. Yeah. Most are full time, and they're getting. I'm guessing they're getting paid by the association or the foundation.
Yeah. Usually the way this works is the association has a dev company, and the dev company, kind of manages all that. And so we've set that up the same way. But essentially, yes, it's the association. Now, the association is a nonprofit. And so it has the mandate, of doing that. And then how it works is you can't have profit. So you can't have like profit sharing or whatever. So everybody, I mean, in practical terms, what that means is all the money that goes out has to basically be for salaries commensurate with the market.
Yeah.
So that's how it all works. And
Yeah. And yeah, the money, whatever money made, though, is not that's not the point. Gets back reinvested into the business itself rather than
that's right.
profit taking.
Yeah.
That's very commendable. And where did you incorporate?
Switzerland.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice. Okay, I was thinking whether it's the US or you've decided to stay far away from the US, because I know a lot of companies that are looking to establish a DAO and to incorporate, they're kind of steering clear of the US. Was that the main reason? Was like the lack of regulatory clarity that made you guys look into Switzerland?
You know, I found a group of lawyers that are highly respected in this domain, and said, you know, because I don't know anything about the law, so I was like,
Right.
I'm going to find a group, and they're going to tell me what to do. So
Fair. Yeah.
that's you know, we try to do everything by the book, and that's what they suggested. So
Very nice. Very, 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 very good. Well, look, I'm hoping that that the political situation in the US is going to get a lot better. The regulatory situation is going to get a lot better. It's early, but it seems like the US is becoming really pro crypto really quickly. And I mean, you can see that as a testament. Like the markets are up, what, 30 Bitcoins, 40% up since the last couple of months.
oh yeah,
Stocks are, up and everything. So I'm hoping that the states will find, place in its heart and on its land to house all of these companies and all of these, people that are working to create all of this cool stuff rather than
I
forcing
hope
people to
so
go
too.
abroad.
I mean, you can see, you know, these hierarchies of power. I mean, they want to gather all the power they can, so they
Yeah.
try to go, you know, for everything. Uh, Luckily, we have concepts like freedom of speech, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because um, you know, if we can keep that one, that's the
Can we
important
please
one.
stick to freedom of speech, guys? Thank you very much.
That one matters, and the reason is, you know, because as a generalized rule, everything is speech. You know, everything is language, and
Yeah.
I don't know. It's very important. That one matters.
It's super important, and it's also super important for people to understand what freedom of speech really means, because I feel like there's this understanding, obviously, not generalizing, but some people think that freedom of speech means, well, you can say whatever you like unless I don't like it, and if I don't like it, then you can go fuck yourself, because that's no longer acceptable. Freedom of speech means being able to speak your mind, whether you're right or wrong, whether you tend to offend or not. You have the right to speak.
Well, yeah, and the community, like the group, there's always this huge tendency in any group to regulate its own speech. And
Yeah.
so what we've said is, okay, since there's already this social pressure to regulate speech, I mean, it
Yeah.
happens, right? I mean, you can't go out and say the right word or you're in big trouble, right?
Sure.
So that's just natural. And so I think the wisdom there is to say, since there's already that force in any society, in any
Yeah.
group, in any company, in any religion, everything regulates its own speech, then we're not going to permit the government to regulate speech explicitly. It's already
Yeah.
handled. We already got it. It's fine. Leave it alone. So, and and then it's evolved to say, okay, we've realized regulation of speech or freedom of speech is really, it's not just speech, like literal language. It's all kinds of expression, right? So we use the term now freedom of expression. Um,
Right.
but I think that's a good thing, so that we recognize that it's more generalized than just speech.
Yeah.
But you know, anyway,
Yeah, well, ideas tend to get extirpated on a speech level because if you know that you shouldn't say this thing, there's only a matter of time until you won't be able to think about this thing, and then there's the only matter of time until then that idea, that concept disappears from the social understanding and the social
Exactly.
fabric of the world, right? It's thought crime by proxy. It is not exactly thought crime, but it's a couple of steps away from making thought illegal. And if you make speech illegal, you could always make the argument that, well, the next thing that they're going to come after is your thoughts, and then we have a big brother society that I don't think anyone, or I think very few people actually want to have.
Right. Yes.
Like
Yes.
everyone that think that's a good idea, please read 1984, and if you don't get the shivers by the end of the book, I swear, like it's a lost cause. um,
So
it's a
true.
crazy thing to believe that so many people are pro censorship of things. And to draw a slight parallel to this, I happened to be on the Satori Discord the other day, and there was a certain user, I think, that was a bit angry that people talk about like general things on the general chat, and it was like, oh, let's just bring it down to just talk about Satori. And like, I didn't want to get into a conversation, but I thought, man, like it's a general chat for general things. I don't know why, trying to
Yes.
condense the sphere of what's up for discussion here, and to regulate it, and to effectively police every new member that comes
Yeah.
on board and asks a question and goes like, no, this is Satori only. You are not allowed to speak about the weather here. No, but it's a data stream.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Let it be what it's going to be. Within reason. I mean, of course, I mean,
Sure.
we got to do something. We can't just have hate speech or whatever else. But, uh, but within reason, it's fine. Let things go their own way.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, I mean, that's part of why we chose the kind of Buddhist motif for, the logo and the name and everything. The Buddhist, it doesn't try to control anything. It's very simple, right? I mean, that's kind of the point. Um, and I think that's a really good fit for a network that will start predicting the future, right? I mean, if you start predicting the future and you do it well, then everybody who's listening and wants to know the future and cares is going to listen to you. And if they listen to you and they believe you, then they're going to act as if whatever you say is true. And so you have to have a archetype or, a personality on this thing that says, I will not control the future. I will give the future that I see, and that's it, right? And so that's very important. Um,
Oh yeah.
and so letting things go their own way is a major part of the philosophy of Satori.
Absolutely. Like the last thing you want is a network with a stake in wanting to shape the
Yeah,
future or change the future or alter the future in any way.
yeah,
Um, we've got, I would say, we have enough misinformation as it is already. We have all these, large language models that are being overly moderated, and they have political bias, and they have all sorts of other biases, right? Um, your news, your media, the same. The TV's got the same. Every advertising agency out there only wants to make money for their clients. There's just so much controlled speech out there that the last thing you want is to add to that, I think.
absolutely. Yes. Yeah, that's the vision. Yeah, that's where we're going.
Yeah. And I have to say, I think you embody that very well. I think you're like very level-headed and very like calm and very objective about things. And I really do like your approach when it comes to this.
I try. Yeah. I mean, that's the goal. I mean, everybody's got an ego, so you got to pay attention to it and make sure it's always in check. And sometimes it's not, right? But you just do the best you
Exactly.
can.
Exactly, yeah. And this is not a Joe Rogan podcast, but if people would have tried psychedelics a bit more, I feel like
Yes.
there's always a chance of, you're more likely to get in touch with your ego, or to understand that there's those things that are not really great about you that maybe you need to change. And
Yeah.
it's not about promoting psychedelics. You could do it through meditation. You could do it through just being mindful,
Yeah.
on a daily basis. It just takes, I feel, willingness to want to be self-aware and to want to improve yourself.
Yeah.
I have a couple of instances with people that I used to work with that there's a specific personality type where they just keep talking to you and talking to you about themselves and only about themselves. And if the topic of conversation is not about themselves, they're not interested, and then they just zone out. And I'm not sure if you've ever come across these type of people, but it's just one of the least enjoyable conversations that you could have when everything someone says is just things about them.
Well, I'm sure I've been that person before,
You don't strike me as the type.
I don't know. But I have noticed, like what you're saying, like even as a general rule, and this applies to me just as much as anybody else, as a general rule, it seems like we're mostly in conversation with ourselves, right? I mean, we have this huge hierarchy, and then we whittle it down, and then we send it across the wire. Now, between the hemispheres, every time like data comes in, you can kind of see it as data comes in at the outer part of your hemisphere, and then it starts to condense down, and it goes through all these layers until it gets to the center. And this is a very basic view, right? But at every layer that it condenses down, the information bounces back out. Some, it's like a filter. Some goes, and then some bounces back. And then a little bit of that filters through, and then it bounces back. And so you have this reverberation all the way down. And and I think that happens between humans too. So you have all these ideas, you have all this stuff, and as you kind of formulate it into language and send it across the wire, you hear it, and whatever you say kind of bounces back. And so I think most people are having a conversation, I should say everybody, is having a conversation with themselves as much as they are having a conversation with the other person. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but it's something we should kind of probably notice.
Yeah. I think it only becomes a bad thing if they're only having the conversation with themselves.
Yes.
If instead of actively listening to what the other person's saying, they're just thinking about the next thing they're going to say. And, so a lot of people are guilty of that. That's when you become kind of like, we're not talking here. Like, I'm saying some things, you're saying some things, and then there's no acknowledgement of what the other person said.
Yeah, like the ego becomes the filter. They're only going to let in information that aligns with their ego. And so if the ego's at the forefront and is like, hey, I don't really care about anything you have to say except unless it applies to me. I'll let that in. Right. I totally. Yeah.
I would say that's also like confirmation bias is also probably one of the top reasons why people get really emotional around like the election period and like political views and stuff, because there's, I think, very few people that are willing to either have a conversation with someone that believes something else than they do, or acknowledge to themselves, like, maybe they made the right decision. Hey, maybe the things that I believed in are not the right things. And I own up to that. And it was my fault for believing this to begin with. Yes. A matter of confirmation bias and ego, is getting people to kind of focus on and only on the things that brings validation to their ideas rather than have their ideas challenged. We have this currently something that's been just tearing at me for the last few days. We have elections going on in presidential elections going on in Romania. I'm based in the UK, but I still I like to follow that because it's obviously where I'm from. And both kind of, because I'm not there, and because like the people that I speak to, I only get information from what they tell me. And then I got to go and look it up myself. And I see like a clear disconnect between what I'm being told from my friends that support this candidate and my friends that support that candidate versus the information that I see on the media. And I would like to make an informed decision about like who I'm going to go vote for, but I have absolutely no clue what's real and what isn't. Like, I feel like the amount of misinformation on both sides is absolutely insane at the moment. We've got this guy that his idea is that he wants to get out of the NATO and EU. That was how he was presented. And then I go and I, listen to the guy speak. He said no such thing. But then
Mm.
he's also being accused of saying things like they find microchips in your Pepsi. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Right.
Um, and then we got this other lady that's supposedly super, like very on the left. But then I go and I listen to her speak and I listen to her ideas, and it doesn't seem to be that way. It's just I feel like it's a very confusing kind of war that's being fought on social media to sway people one or another. And I don't think I've ever seen something so intense in the amount of misinformation that you get on both sides.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, that's just the way it always is. I mean, because all the incentive structures are like, we want to believe what we think is true, and we want to disseminate that belief out into the world. That's just, I mean, it seems like that's what, people talk about this concept, late stage capitalism, right? The term late stage. It seems like that's what late stage media is. It's just at the beginning, you form a group or whatever, and it's, could be a global civilization, whatever. You form a group and you start talking, and you all start trying to come into consensus on, and you're curious, you're trying to figure out what is going on here and what do other people believe. I want to know, right? I'm curious. And then once you feel like it seems like you hit this threshold where it's like, okay, I know where I'm at. I know what everybody else is at. And then you start switching over to export. Now I want to export my ideas out there and say, this is the way it is, guys. And so, and then we do this, especially when we have economic incentives, right? I mean, we do this everywhere. And so, it's just natural that's going to happen. It kind of seems like if you want the truth, you just got to go to the source. And then if you can find some sources that will translate stuff that seem the right way, that you listen to the source and now you find this other source that's talking about it and it seems to match what you heard, then you can kind of trust that a little bit. But if you really want the truth, you just got to go to the source yourself.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like there's barely any like worthwhile dialogue when it comes to these situations, especially something as important as a presidential election. There's just people on the left hitting people on the right, people on the right hitting people on the left. And it just degenerates into misinformation and propaganda. And I really don't think this is the best way to communicate ideas for an important event over social media. Like, people, instead of kind of having a constructive discussion, is just, and we're at the stage where people can employ like thousands of bots on one side or the other and sway the algorithm and like really kind of manipulate this in the most insidious way. And I think we're just seeing the start of that. I think if there's no, I guess, way to kind of actually be able to fact check or to keep a check on these discussions, it can always degenerate from here. Like, can you imagine 2028 election, like how much more we'll know about the impact of social media over the election results? I think that's going to be absolutely mad.
That's a good point. When you get self-referential and you start to educate everybody on, okay, this is how much media sways us. It seems like that is, it almost seems like it's an arms race, but that's like the only way you can improve, is becoming self-aware and self-referential. It seems like that's the antidote to the lies we tell ourselves. I mean, like when I was young, I knew from an early age I wanted to know everything. I wanted to know the truth. And not everybody's like that. It's okay. We shouldn't all have the same value hierarchy, but truth was a very high value to me. And so, I'd come home every day from school. I'd watch Bill Nye. I wasn't getting what I really wanted out of school. I felt like I could learn more truth more quickly that way. And what I would do is, the reason I'd watch it is I liked the feeling of learning something and having it click and being like, okay, I don't understand what you're talking about. And then at some point it all clicks and you're like, I get it. That's pretty cool. And so I really liked that feeling. So I'd watch that show. Anyway, and I bring this up because I had the belief, the very naive, childish perspective that there's stuff we know, we figured it out, we've solved the puzzle, and that's what the world is, big puzzle. And then there's stuff that we don't know. We just haven't figured it out yet. And I thought, well, that's all there is, that's the whole place. That's all we got. But as you start getting older, you realize eventually that there's stuff and there's stuff you don't know, but there's also stuff that you won't allow yourself to know. You won't allow yourself to know because it's either too painful, too scary, too annoying, whatever it is, right? So in order to appease your comfort level, there's lies that you tell yourself. For sure. Like this is true for everybody, everywhere.
Oh yeah.
And but that, being true for the individuals that we are is really just an analogy to say it's true for every group of individuals. It's true for every religion, every company, every political leaning, everything. And so it seems like this self, and it makes it worse, like you mentioned. It makes it worse when we have this desire to be right. We may not really care too much about the truth. We care about being the truth, right? We care about our opinion being the right one, and rather than our opinion reflecting what is right. And so I think it's just inevitable. It's just part of the simulation, part of the simulacra, where the more you talk to yourself, the more you're in communication with yourself, you go through a phase where the lies become very popular, very, and hopefully you get out of that phase eventually where you say, I have discovered self-awareness, right? I've discovered the realization that you can question yourself and you can kind of try to understand why you think what you think and what you think and was this, and you can look back on the past and try to figure it out. And so the antidote to that seems to be self-awareness as much as you can get. That's very hard to do because it's inconvenient to face truths that you might have been lying to yourself about.
100%. People don't want to be wrong. That's one like brick wall there, like a defense mechanism. People just don't want to be wrong. And I think, in fact, you mentioned simulation. That's really interesting because I was going towards, if you remember that scene in The Matrix when Neo is finally out of the Matrix and then he goes back in and then asks Morpheus, "Hey, why do I look the same? Why do I got like these new clothes and the glasses and stuff?" Well, that's your residual self-image. That is like what you think that you yourself are. That those are your beliefs, and it, to some extent, maybe it's just to do with the things you can shed, the things you can get rid of, rather than the things you can accumulate that will tell you who you really are, right? And that's kind of a scary concept because if you go and think about, well, I'm gonna get rid of my likes in music, and I'm gonna get rid of my hobbies, and I'm gonna remove this part of myself and that part of myself, what am I really? What's left, there? And you'll discover, well, now there's not really much. It's just a void which you can choose to fill it with, and it will be filled with something. And it's a pretty scary idea. Like I completely understand why once you found something, you want to like take that thing, just put it in there, just jam it into that existential void, so that it doesn't bother you, I guess.
We want something to identify with. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're always identifying. This is one reason I like Terence McKenna. I mean, he said a lot of crazy stuff. One cool crazy thing he said was don't believe. Don't believe anything. Yeah. Stop believing. Stop it. And stop
Absolutely.
trying to identify and I mean, that's the Buddhist approach. Like don't attach to anything. But it's great.
Yeah. He also said that the cost of sanity in this society is a certain level of alienation.
Yeah.
And that couldn't be more true, because if you really want to be your own individual and to have your own beliefs and your own ideas, you can't subscribe to anyone else's ideas. And how many times have you caught yourself hearing someone say something and then you're repeating that very thing, thinking that you're the one that thought about that, when in reality you've done no thinking. And I catch myself doing this, and every time I do it, I'm like, fuck, and we're all guilty of that. It's just being aware of it. There's this cool kind of meditation exercise that there's this writer I like, Robert Anton Wilson. He was like a futurist / he's a really intriguing character because he comes back. He started writing back in the 80s, 90s. He's got like a background in in mysticism and the occult. He was like studying Aleister Crowley, but because he got popular in the 90s when computers became popular as well, he has this kind of, he's trying to mix that philosophy, the mysticism, with computers and science and programming, which I found like he's got a really interesting take on things. But one of the exercises he proposed is like you just sit down in a chair and you try to answer the question, why am I sitting in this chair right now? Oh, well, because I'm at home, because I live in this flat. Okay, but why? Oh, because, and you keep asking yourself that question, why, and you eventually end up with something like really like deconstructing something like, oh, because the Japanese invaded China like in the 16th century or something like that. Like you end into weird places if you follow that exercise.
Yeah, that's interesting. Seems like you can go down the layers of your own psyche and get to a place where it almost seems like you would eventually get to a place where you're like, I am sitting here because I chose to sit here. This is where I'm at. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. But then you go, okay, so why are you here? Because I was born in the US, and therefore I live in this town because of my mom and dad and their career path and choices. Okay, but why? Oh, well, because, my granddad came from Ireland, and then they wanted to have a chance at a better life, so they moved across the ocean. Okay, but why is that? Oh, because Ireland had a pretty difficult history and their fights for freedom. But why? Well, because the Vikings invaded, like, in the in year 794 or whatever. And you can keep, but why did they invade? Oh, because they happen to have like good carpenters that could build boats, and then, they could travel the ocean. But why? And it just keeps going.
Oh, that's awesome. And isn't that the premise of kind of the Western philosophy of the first cause? Like everything, you can just trace it all the way back. And eventually you get to a point where you're saying, well, because... Like if you ask the 3-year-old ask its parents again and again, why? Eventually the parents are just like, because.
Yeah. You've exhausted all the questions. That's it. No, there are no more questions.
And you can just do it forever. And so it kind of seems like, I don't know, it kind of seems like eventually you get out of the realm of causality and out of the realm of form, of time. And you have to say, well, I got to make the leap out of this physical reasoning of saying, Why? Because of this, because it's always multifactorial and there's always a lot of causes for every effect, and you can just trace it back forever. Any thread you want to pull can just go forever and ever. And and so eventually I think it comes down to, I mean, it seems like an existential, metaphysical kind of inquiry, because eventually you get to the point where you say, well, I'm aware. I'm the awareness that's sitting in this chair right now. And so either I have to say, I don't know. I don't know why I'm sitting here. Or I have to say, I trust that it's because I decided to sit here at some point. I don't know. So, I had this experience when I was very young. I was 4 years old. It was my first experience of being empathetic ever in my life. I had never been empathetic before. I had never cared about anyone else. And I was 4 years old, and I'm playing, I'm doing my thing. I have a little sister. She's a baby, right? And we didn't have a lot of money. So my parents kind of had to ration like diapers. It was like, well, you get like 2 or 3 diapers a day, and that's it, So my little sister had a diaper rash, and my mom was changing her, and this had happened before, where she's crying because she's got this diaper rash, and I always found it to be annoying, and then this time though, I asked my mom, like, can't you shut that baby up, like, what's wrong with you? And and she's like, well, it's gotta hurt, it's a sad thing or whatever. And so this time I was invited to kind of give a thought about what was going on as in a larger picture, not just react to my annoyance, let that come out. So I all of a sudden got a little curious, and I thought about it. Like, let's investigate here. What's going on? So I'm 4 years old, and I look at the baby and I think, what would it be like to be that baby right now? You're getting your diaper changed. It hurts. It's all red and whatever. And so I thought, oh, she doesn't really know what's going on. She doesn't know why this is happening at all. She just knows she doesn't like it, and it hurts. And I remember experiencing that thought and thinking, this is a unmitigated torture that she can't, and and all of a sudden I realized that I was feeling like this empathy towards her. And then it went out a little broader. I had this realization that no matter how we suffer, we can never know why we suffer. None of us at all, ever. My annoyance, right, at her crying was a form of suffering, and I didn't know why it was happening, just like she didn't know. Nobody knows. And so this existential realization that you can't trace the reason of your suffering back, because you will never actually know what caused it. It was like shocking to me. I didn't know what to do with it, right? But I always remembered it because you can't trace it. And so it seems like if you can't trace it, you just have to trust it. You have to do whatever you can in the moment, and live your life. But you just have to trust that that's, you can't trace it. So I don't know. I don't know. You just try not to identify and just try to be calm and accept it.
Yeah, I feel 100%. You can't trace it, and you can't force yourself to understand something that maybe maybe it's one of those things, going back to what you said, that there's things you know, there's things you don't know, there's things you don't want to know, and maybe there's also things you can't know. Maybe there's things that are just, on such a deep subconscious level that it's something that you're not meant to process, right? Which is like the whole human condition, right? And like the tragedy of existence. Like, why is that happening? Why are people who have on paper the best lives, some of them are still depressed, some of them are still, through going through something which they can't explain why that happens, apart from chemicals in the brain. But is that all there is, or are we talking about like a deeper kind of thing there?
Well, I think the thing that gives it a deeper expression, I guess, I don't know, is is a realization that is hard to express, but I think the early quantum physicists people got a glimpse of, and they tried to kind of express it, but we weren't ready for that truth yet. And the truth is that anything that you can't know, anything you cannot know, is in a superposition of everything it could be, right? Of everything that it could be. It's not a particular thing that you just don't know. It actually has to be everything that it could be, but in an unseen superposition, right?
Right.
And I don't think we really understood that. We got into this debate where we're like, well, no, it's the observer effect. It collapses, the wave. Or I don't know.
Yeah.
And we kind of ignored that realization. But that's kind of what the double slit experiment tells us. And so if you can't know, if you can't know your suffering, why it occurred, it's both unfair and fair at the same time, and it has to be that way. It's in a superposition. And so you get traditions that say, well, it's totally fair. It's your karma. It's what you are. It's where you came from. It's due to what you are and who you are and who you're going to be and who you've been. And then you get other, I don't know if we could call it traditions. How about philosophy that says, no, it's all, everything's completely random and there's no reason for anything to happen. And it's just completely chaos and absolutely absurd. And we have to get to a point, I think, someday when we recognize that both of these beliefs are as legitimate as the other, because it's something that we cannot know. And so it's not to say that they're both false. It's to say that they're both false and they're both true. And
100%.
I'm not exactly sure what to do with that. It seems like it's avoiding the question, but
I feel that's correct. Yeah.
I think it matters, because then you can compare it to something like death, and you can say, well, I'll never know that I have died after I'm dead. So is death real? Right? It seems like it takes the sting out a little, because at that point you have to say, oh, well, that means it's not a particular thing, which means if I have a particular model of death and I say, well, it's that we're just, you're just dead and you're gone and that's it.
Yeah.
Well, actually, no, right? You can say, well, it can't be that because that's specific, that's particular. And so anything that you could imagine that's particular, it's not that, right? So
True.
it means it's the superposition. And anyway, I don't know. It definitely means something else, though.
Yeah. The way you look at the world and the way you perceive the world is kind of like the double state experiment in itself, right? Because you could perceive it from a perspective of that everything is chaos and nothing matters, or you could perceive it from a Buddhist set of beliefs where, well, you are what you are because of reincarnation, or Hinduist because of the karma, because of what you've done, or so it's the way you perceive the world becomes it. And
yes,
it is true for you, maybe it's not the absolute truth, because the absolute truth, like you said, could be a superposition where all of those things are real, but it's real enough for your experience, temporary here on this earth, which, what's stopping you from believing in that, then, if that's what you like to believe?
Yes, if that's what you want to identify with, that's what the world starts to reflect. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I like that we kept this on topic with Satori. I feel that's brilliant. But no, genuinely, I do enjoy this quite a lot. So, do you have anything that you would like to announce at all for anyone that might be listening to the pod? Anything to do with
Oh,
the network, Satori, future new features? Come and join the Discord, stuff like that.
yeah. Join the Discord. We put out like a weekly update every Sunday night, and so and we kind of just try to keep everybody up to date, at least with that. We do big announcements sometimes when something's been completed or whatever, but you can kind of see most of what's in the workings through that weekly update. Um, so yeah, I mean that's a great place to go.
Nice one, man. And probably by the time this is live, the requirement, the staking requirement would have gone up. So just add a +1 to whatever it is currently, I guess.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, listen, man, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. I really enjoyed this discussion, and you're welcome anytime in the future. Anytime you want to, just talk or talk about Satori or any important things, always welcome here, man.
Yeah, this has been a great conversation. Thank you.
My pleasure. Well, I'll speak to you later then.
We'll see you.
Take care. Bye, everybody.